The president wants to speak to us.
The prez, like what could he possibly have said?
That your platform's inflamed a volatile situation, circulating unfalsifiable deep fakes, massive fraud, market instability.
Hi, I'm Jesse Armstrong, the writer and director of the new movie Mountainhead. I'm at the IndieWire studio in New York. We're about to discuss the movie on the Filmmaker Toolkit podcast.
So I want to make sure I have this right. You have the idea November-ish, you're pitching to HBO in December, and you're quickly writing at the beginning of the new year. Is that the time? We're talking 2004, and
yeah,
is that the timeline that we're talking about here?
Yeah, that's it's correct. I've been doing a bit of press these last few days talking about the movie, and that's the truth. I guess it did start to germinate a little bit before that. Thinking I'd been reading about tech world since writing a book review about Sam Bankman-Fried, and so maybe that I'd been percolating on it, but I really tried not to write something about rich people again. But I couldn't get the voices of these guys out of my head. So yeah, it eventually crystallized. November, flew and saw Casey and said, "What do you think? Do you think this is a film?" December.
You know, as you're starting to do this project, Trump's elected, Musk and Doge are coming in. Compared to Succession, was there a concern of it being dated, in the sense that this is a story that's unfolding right now, and that was part of the impetus for going this fast?
Yeah, the impetus was explicitly kind of to Casey of like, would it be possible to do this really fast? Because I hadn't written it at that point. Could I write it and have it come out in the same 4, 5, 6 months? In a way, I don't feel like the specific news agenda is going to date it, because Doge, as you say, Doge kind of bubbled up and kind of burst in the lifespan between the inception and the making and release of it. And I think those cultural things around it inform it in a way which is fine. I was just worried that if it was like a normal movie took 2 years or 18 months, that something essential would not feel like it was in conversation with the audience any longer.
Because it's not so much story points as much as these tech moguls gaining more power. I think that's really the thing, right? It's like there actually is no Doge connection here right now, but it's just this idea that their power is going beyond their wealth and their influence in tech, right? Is that? Yeah,
I guess who knows how long this kind of cuspy moment of anxiety about what social media, but especially AI, is going to do. And it may be that we just discover that we're going to live in a certain kind of anxiety for the next decade, but I wanted to be around that, the feeling that the audience might be sharing.
You told the Financial Times, I'm going to pull up this quote, this is great. Another reason that you wanted to go fast. I wanted to just run at it rather than what I could have done, which is worry about, this is the idea that you're directing for the first time, which is worry about it for a year and try to watch every tutorial on YouTube about how to direct a movie.
Yeah, that was definitely another thing, like on a much more base, practical, human level. I thought it was a good idea for me to direct it, 'cause I knew the tone. I wanted to direct something that seemed appropriate, but I was really scared. And so, yeah, it felt good to not have too much time to think about it and be, pre-production's just around the corner, and you can't keep watching YouTube tutorials when you're answering questions about what kind of bag everyone should be carrying.
Well, Succession had, and we've covered this on this podcast, Mark Mylod's been on a few times, we did a deep dive into season 2, had such a unique approach to production. And I'm wondering how much of that you held on to. Chronological order, the cameras, the TV shows weren't normally made that way. And I'm wondering how much of that, as you went into your first directing gig, you held on to some of that.
Yeah. And although I'm older, I'm still relatively inexperienced. I didn't grow up in American TV and come through the writers' rooms and the echelons of hierarchy that you might do in the US. So I came from being a British sitcom writer into Succession. That's really the only big show I've ever been around or known. So that seems like the way you make stuff to me. It's a way that I find very amenable. Learned from Adam McKay, shot the pilot, and Mark Mylod, who did so many of the big episodes. Yeah, and I surrounded myself with a ton of my colleagues from Succession on this. And so I think people who start watching it will find the look and feel of it quite familiar, even if the tone is rather different and certainly develops differently.
But the idea of the chronological is important too, right? Because if I remember correctly on Succession, the idea that you are also able to make adjustments as you go, right?
Yeah, and we do that mainly for jokes, and I did that process of having some alternative lines, some alts there on the day to offer to the actors. But also, yeah, being able to adjust character and little plot things as you go. If you go in chronological order, I love that. It's great for the actors. I'm pretty stupid, so it's good to have it laid out in chronological order and not have to remember. I mean, you have a lot of people to help you, but who was wearing what on what day? I think emotionally, remembering where everyone is. You can tell an actor, oh, we're going to shoot this scene, and you're going to come out of it pretty hot because this has just happened emotionally. But feeling it and knowing the precise point on the thermostat that they are arriving into a scene because they just did it the day before, it's a different ball game from doing that in theory.
So it's more dialogue, jokes within the scenes than it is.
Yeah, emotional temperature and jokes that marry up and references that marry up. I think that's what the chronological shooting gives you.
Another collaborator you brought with you was Stephen Carter, production designer, and always there was these gilded cages in your previous series. And one of the things that was so amazing about them was it was never wealth porn. It always felt uncomfortable. None of these people felt like home. You know, it didn't matter what they were surrounded by. This wasn't a place you want to cozy up or enjoy the view. Mountainhead certainly has that, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the house, finding it and that process.
Yeah. I mean, they're gilded cages, or sort of really more beige prison cells, aren't they? That wealth has this kind of international hotel feel to it. I've scouted a lot of these locations, and there is a similarity. I guess it's often people who spend time a lot of different places around the globe, and maybe they like that uniformity, but it doesn't have much aesthetic zing to it. It's pretty beige, pretty oatmeal. We took a long time to find the house. There were a number of scary moments on this production where, given the compressed timetable that we were trying to achieve, it could have fallen apart over casting, over me flunking it and not coming up with the script on time. But not finding the house was one of the major ones. You know, we were looking in Canada, we were looking in the US. I had a few requirements that I wanted. I was flexible, but I knew that it was almost all going to be in this house, and as a director I was eager that it wasn't, we couldn't, you know, as they say, shoot it out, get bored of the location too quickly. So it was scary when we hadn't found it, and in fact I was so behind on writing the script, and I had to at a certain point just leave the team to do it, Marcel Ziskin, the DP, and Stephen Carter and Jill Footlick, and just keep on looking around houses, because I needed to write the script. If we didn't find the house, we kind of knew the thing might fall apart, but it would certainly fall apart if we didn't have a script. But then I think I knew that we had the right place when Marcel, who's Danish, called me up and said he'd come away from this house with just this incredibly strong feeling of depression. It sort of had a psychic, it shocked him to his core, the kind of the scale of it. You know, it's drilled down into this mountainside over seven floors with a basketball court at the bottom, and it was, you know, but has these tremendous vistas out over Utah. So it's really a character in the movie, I guess.
From all of these, looking for these types of locations, have you ever put in the back of your head what you would do with a lot of money? Like you would or is it like, is there a certain scale at which you're like, you know, you really are stuck with these kind of. Have you been sitting there like, you know, it's like what?
Yeah, when we were in Tuscany, I mean, it's pretty hard to screw up a Renaissance villa.
Buy old. I think that's what I've thought too. I'd buy old. I want to talk about these guys with Lucas, the Alex Skarsgård character. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but this is a little bit different. He was kind of kooky, a little sexy, a little charming. Some of the philosophy was there, but it was like, this is a little bit different where you've kind of grown with looking at these types of characters, right? Yeah.
I mean, in a way, I loved writing that character, and Alex was brilliant, but he functioned really as a sort of antagonist and as a foreboding for what was coming for the world that we were portraying, that world of legacy media. So yeah, you're right. We only touched on the sort of philosophy he might have glancingly, but this is an attempt to look head on at the kind of people who are at the very centre of the culture, at the centre of informational culture. Certainly, it's interesting because it is something that I feel, as someone who follows the news, it's hard to sometimes fathom the way that these guys look at the world. And there's this great scene. I wrote down some of the dialogue. An hour into the movie, the world is literally on fire. You know, they're following it on the phones. And Jeff, the Rami Youssef character,
goes to Steve Carell, and he's kind of like, maybe we should step in and help tone this down. He says, I believe in it all. I really do. Bootstrap to corporate monarchy, cyberstate to singularity. Eat the chaos. But right now, we're having a lot of fun with dollars in our homes and our bodies. The nation state, what if the old girl has another 20 years in her? And the idea here, it's interesting. It's 20 years. Like, he's kind of like the conservative one, and he's like, you know, I'm not against this, but he's like, you know, maybe another, you know, wait till the kids go to college type thing. You know, it's just like, I mean, to me, as a layman, it feels like almost this sci-fi future they believe in, that they're reaching for.
Yeah, but if you immerse yourself just a little bit in this world, you know, you hear of the people who work in AI who cancel their pensions because they think either we're going to be gone or money's going to be irrelevant, you know, and I think they see on that kind of timeline, they see that kind of change. Now, when you're inside something, you can sometimes overestimate it and get it wrong. It doesn't mean just because you're close to something you've got the full picture. But the people who work the closest to artificial intelligence, the tech phrase P-doom, you know, you're the probability of doom, the probability of the end of humanity. And most of these people have a number in their head. And even the optimistic ones, like Sam Altman, I think he talks about like 20%, you know, and that's someone who's selling this stuff to us.
But they see it as a utopia where this is headed. You know, at least your characters do, but I mean, I've heard similar things to this before where it's like they are actually cheering this on to a certain degree.
And who knows how much of that is a genuine estimation of where they think we're going and how much is necessary to get up in the morning and go and do what you do. I guess, you know, Randall says the antidote to bad tech is good tech, and I think he may believe it, but he certainly needs to believe it, because if you don't believe it, what the fuck are you doing? Right? So I think you've got to believe that, and you can see examples of that may be how it pans out. The fact is that nobody knows.
It's funny because they would never say some of these things aloud that they say in your show, right? Like, there's a thing here that doesn't sound quite. One thing of AI, this fear of AI is one thing, but but some of these things that they're talking, you know, when they start talking about transhuman, they start talking about like the way they start viewing other, you know, a good starter country, or like, you know, the idea that they're going to take over, you know, that they can come in and bring efficiency to these governments that are falling apart. You know, it's just there's a part here they're not saying this publicly to a certain degree.
To a certain degree. However, if you tune into, you know, Lex Friedman and All In and the podcasts which litter this world, you will hear not totally dissimilar views expressed. You know, that was one of the things which was attractive as a writer to me, that there's a lot of material to try and tune into the vocabulary and the texture of conversation of these guys, and they are almost all guys. So I know what you mean. Hopefully, you know, one of the invitations to Succession and to this movie is like, have a look behind the curtain. This is what these people might be like. This is what I think they might be like behind closed doors. But it's surprising what people say in public.
Is that one of the things here? Is as you mentioned 2 podcasts, and I'd read that you became, after reviewing the Michael Lewis book, you started listening to all these things and reading everything you could get. Was that part of this, is just hearing the way they talk in your head? There, as a writer and as a comedic writer, you couldn't not.
Absolutely. You know, I've written in a few worlds like politics and media families, and all of them, one of the first things that has clicked for me is getting a vocabulary, getting a voice for the show, a tone for the show, and that's what I couldn't stop hearing, and what made me pitch this was primarily the tone of voice of confidence, sometimes shading potentially into arrogance of this world, which I guess it comes from its cultural centrality and also the amount of money that's accruing.
So that scene between Rami Youssef and Steve Carell that I picked that dialogue up for.
Yeah.
That then leads to, Rami's got to go. You know, it's like Jeff's got to go. He's going to be in the way of our future and in the way of our heaven. And that scene that follows, I'm curious, in context of what we were just talking about, could you discuss your thought process in going into the half an hour of a murder? Do you know, the idea of plotting a murder? I mean, obviously there's enormous comedic possibilities there and some dark comedy, but I'm wondering if you could talk about that in context of what we were just saying and the story you wanted to go, because it is a different thing.
Yeah. And so I guess, the tone, I hope the ending of the movie is latent in the beginning, but it's definitely a transition. I guess what I like about it is taking things to their logical conclusion. Zero basing the Elon's philosophy with Doge. Like let's cut everything else away and rebuild. As they often say, from first principles. What are the first principles? What we're trying to achieve here? And if you start taking that approach and looking at it from a comic perspective, you can get to some funny and dark places. So I guess, following premises to their logical conclusions is funny and interesting to me, and I think is appropriate, very appropriate for this world, because how do you end up taking away HIV drugs from children who are going to die? How the fuck do you get there? Well, you get there because you convince yourself that you're following a perfectly logical process, and that is terrifying. So I knew that I needed it to go into a morally other space, which is where they end up.
One of the things I love about the humor that you find there is these are well-read guys. These are not idiots. And it's just very funny listening to them wrestle with, using, at one point, run the numbers, even make sure that we're in a net positive for doing this. And then, or wrestling with Kant. It's like there's something that you had to have had a field day with stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are probably skimmers like me, and some of them probably are. It feels as if Randall has some very strong feelings about Immanuel Kant. I think one of the things that happens in that world is pulling on the mantle, pulling on the cloaks. They like the Stoics and Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, don't they? But I think it's a thing that people, especially men, do is reach for some of that appealing looking scent from the highest cultural shelf.
It's an art form in the world of comedy of how you can get dark and still keep it funny. I'm wondering but I mean, I don't think you've probably ever gone here before. What were some of the kind of things that you kind of worked out, or I don't know if this was with the actors or if it's in the writing, but how do you? Obviously you want it to get dark, and sometimes it gets visually dark, but I mean, what was that balancing act like?
I guess it's instinctive, and hopefully people will feel we got it right. I worked with Chris Morris. It was really his achievement as director on the film Four Lions, which is terrorism comedy, which is, even darker than this movie, I would say, in the places it goes to. It's gut feeling. It's like what's the appropriate level of emotional engagement for the audience to feel the gravity of this, and then what then just seems ludicrous in amongst the darkness. I love being in that territory, and you get a chance to fine-tune it on the page, then you get another chance to run it with the actors and see how they feel, and often when you're working with people with such finely attuned kind of comic thermostats, you can change a scene hugely by just giving a small note to someone like Jason Schwartzman or Steve Carell, obviously. So you get a number of opportunities to adjust, and then the edit, again, lets you go, you know what, we've pushed it over the edge there. That sound effect needs to come down. That little noise in the background lets you know this hesitation. So it's a very human, very finely tuned thing you're looking for.
The bowling ball is a piece of brilliant comedic writing, because the way that you could do it, because suddenly it becomes how bumbling they are, or having to wrestle with it while they're really trying to get out of being the one who does it. It's just it's beyond funny. You mentioned cast. You're working again here with Francine Maisler, who there's a lot of great casting directors. I don't think there's anybody that's been better at an ensemble.
No, I agree.
I tried to hunt her down for 5 years to interview her, and finally got her with Sorkin. Then she emailed me endlessly, and she's like, "Fuck you for making me talk about what I do." But she's a spitfire. But And she, one of the most brilliant pieces of casting is that in her very impressive resume is the Roy family,
Yeah.
which was counterintuitive, but she's brilliant. I'm curious, working again with her, how did she help you, and what kind of insight did she have into this?
It's great, and it's the whole period has been a bit of a whirlwind. But when Francine is on the job, you enter this kind of reality for like 4 weeks or something as you put the group together. It's like being in a very intense relationship. Like you are texting and making phone calls with her at sort of weird hours. Time melts. I don't know what time it is in LA or what time it is in London or Utah, but it's just like a constant stream of consciousness between. It was actually me, Frank Rich, and Francine as she put together these different grids and came up with different names and theories, and you have all these, this person fits with this person because of that, and this would never work. Yeah, anyway, it's a very enjoyable but quite a tumble dryer of thoughts and feelings as you put it together. Also with schedules, we were really tight to this, and it was not easy to get.
Who could be in Utah?
Who
for
could
3
be there?
weeks
Yeah,
in
exactly.
April or whatever.
Steve was the keystone who said early yes and without a script, and was very generous in doing that. And then I think all the other three were kind enough to tape and just were solidified into a group that felt real. I love people who come from comedy. Rami's work I admired. Jason's I really admired. Corey I didn't know as well, but although
I don't know, he's the one I didn't know very well. And he's fantastic.
But he's brilliant, and he's worked with Todd Haynes a bunch, who obviously admires him and seems to go back to him. And he's in the Saturday Night Movie doing a brilliant portrayal. So when you look at the group at the end, and you've been doing the process with Francine, you get this feeling of like, yeah, this is right. This feels really right.
Yeah, because it's. I think the point here, and we'll just use Schwartzman because we love Schwartzman. He's fantastic in this, but I think maybe to the point, Schwartzman works with these three. There might have been a different combo.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, I think people think of casting as this guy's right for this role or something like that. But in this case, you really have to get the four right. Right?
Yeah.
There is a word. I'm not wrong.
Absolutely. And that's what Francine was constantly doing, is sending you different visual images of people together. And I think just faces and feel is really important to getting a combination that works. Yeah.
Obviously, the story here is how quickly you did this. Was the edit that much different than we were talking about this beforehand? But with TV, there is a production model with TV here. But I mean, I'm wondering if you talk a little bit about.
Yeah, it was fast. It didn't. I think everyone else looked more scared than me. But when I got to the edit on the first day, I started to become as scared as everyone else. I overwrite, and then we shoot some loose takes. So the first cut was 2 hours and 3/4. I knew that as a sort of comedy movie, I was desperate for it to be under 2 hours. So we had a lot of work to do fast. I think that if you're making a feature film, I think the DGA gives you like 10 weeks before you have to show anyone. I had like 9 days before I needed to show it to HBO to try and start coalescing around whether the decisions I'd made were right. It's a group that I know, Casey and Franny and Clint at HBO, I know. So it wasn't like showing it to some faceless execs. They were kind of, and they knew the process and they knew the script, so they were kind of inside the tent, hopefully. But it was intense. I feel like with Bill Henry, who was there out in Utah, and so I'd go in on the weekends and see what we've got, so that we were sort of already in it as we were doing it. And then Mark Davies, an old friend and colleague of mine, was working on a different timeline in London and looking at other pieces. So we, of the Monday after the Friday when we finished shooting, they had a long cut that was in good shape because they're really smart and they make good decisions. But then, we did have to work fast. But I think we did the normal process. We just did it in accelerated form.
There is something different, too, about the arc of a 2 hour, of a movie,
Yeah.
Right? Like
yeah.
There's something because that's you can get the edit right, but there's a certain element of...
Absolutely, the rhythm, right?
Yeah.
It's a different rhythm. I'm scared doing that. So I've not directed a movie before, and so I was scared about getting that rhythm right. And the audience will have to say whether they think we did or not. But it falls into some pretty relatively clear acts, I would say, this piece.
Was our friend Nick Britell working alongside you, or did he get started earlier on this?
He was one of the first calls I made to see if he would be willing to do it. He was similarly found the schedule bracing, shall we say. But as soon as he saw the script, I felt like he went up another gear of like, he sort of knew what he wanted to do, and he's unbelievably smart, and he had an intellectual approach of like this kind of techno-feudalism, as he put it, that he had a sound in his head that I didn't know what it was, but I just trusted him that if he had a strong lead, it was going to be right. And as soon as he started playing me stuff, he flew out to Utah and came and watched some of the work we were doing, which I think he found useful. And he played me some stuff, and I had the same kind of hairs on the back of my neck sticking up that I'd had when he first played me themes and suggested moods for Succession. So, yeah, what a great collaborator.
From a story standpoint, I think the last beat is Vin and Jeff.
Yeah.
Did you always know that you wanted that beat of? Because it's a little bit of a surprise. It's a little, at least for me, it was a surprise that Rami walks out of that car and does that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, tonally, I knew that was where we would be. Soon after I had a green light to do it, I got together Lucy Preble, Tony Roach, John Brown, Will Tracy, who are exec producer writers on Succession.
Yeah, Will and Tony were writers on, right?
They were all of them. They're
all writers.
They were all writers on Succession,
okay.
and they all did this writers' room with me and offered
so you
ideas.
You did a normal writer.
I did
a
1 week kind of super accelerated. Like, is this going to work? Am I crazy? What do you think? And we did toy in that. We did some thought experiments with what could the worst thing happen. That's when he's in that little room and the worst things are. So I tried to entertain the different possibilities, but we came out of that room, or I came out of that room with the same idea that I went in with, and that was the ending of the movie. Always, I think the specific shot, and you end up somewhere else with different characters, but I think that tone of an accommodation being made was what I wanted. It's
a gut punch because Rami's the guy that we're holding on to. And after everything he's been through, we're like, okay, he's still going to be, So it's a little bit, it's a little bit to see him after everything he's been through and after all how he was viewing it. It's quite something, but it feels earned.
Thank you. Good.
Going back, you in 2010 had a blacklisted script, Murdock. And the pitch was, as a family gathers for the birthday, Rupert Murdock tries to convince his elder children to alter the family trust so that his two youngest children, by his newest wife, will have the voting rights in the company. And people who've read that script love it. It didn't get made, and obviously the seeds of the Murdock story we've seen in other works. And you're a little bit of a historian in how you like to pull from it. I'm curious, though, that idea now of doing something that would be like, this is Rupert Murdock, versus what you have been doing for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
Being a Peter Morgan versus being a Jesse.
Yeah,
Jesse,
right.
It feels like, maybe if this movie had been made, you would have gone that path.
Yeah.
But to live in a fictional world instead feels a little bit more freeing for you as a writer?
Yeah. I mean, now when I look back, and I enjoyed writing that, I found it testing. And I felt, although I feel critical of Murdock and what Fox News has done around the world, and especially in the US, I felt a lot of responsibility just as a human being not to be careless about the facts of who these people were and what they thought and how they acted. And there's a lot of sort of minor league, writerly, moral wrestling you do if you are portraying real people. It's just a lot more fun when you're in, and once I'd read the books about Robert Maxwell and Tiny Rowland, British news proprietor, and Conrad Black, who went to jail in Canada, the freedom for being able to steal from everywhere and say, this is the feel of one of these families, and he can be more Sumner Redstone, he can be more Brian Cox, I can cast him and change anything about him. It's incredibly liberating, and it lets me be much more funny, I hope. Yeah, unbelievably liberating. And it's true, if that had got made, maybe I might have ended up making the Sam Altman story. And there are great pieces in that space. And for a long time, when I was developing that, I felt like it has to be this, because this is what you want to show people, the reality. So that's an honourable pursuit, but it comes, I think, with some moral responsibilities, which I'm frankly glad to be absolved of.
But it also feels like as a creative writer, it's the best of both worlds. You can, and we all recognize certain things, but it's like you can take from the history, you can take from the stories, but you can create narratives that speak to something larger than having to debate what really happened on the boat, or things like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I love it. I love frankly being able to steal. That's a great story, but it's from Honda, the car company. But you can guess what? We change this and that, and we can give it, put it into this shape. So it's tremendous liberation, and you hope that you end up telling the lie that tells the truth if you in the grandest version of it, but just on a micro level, it allows you to engage in the most dreadful theft from real life from anywhere you want.
Last question, and I have to ask: after season 4 aired and there was some reporting done, were you surprised how far you had crawled in Murdock's head? Because I was reading some of these Gabe Sherman pieces and what was going into so, like how obviously they're aware of it, obviously they don't like it, but I mean it was a little surprising to me how far you had climbed in, that your show had climbed into the Murdock's head.
But I think not Rupert Murdock. I never got the sense Rupert Murdock. I think he genuinely doesn't really give a fuck about any of this stuff.
There was things about the show in legal proceedings.
But there was something about Jerry Hall not talking to the writers or something.
Yes.
I always thought, I bet if you got that document, it would be a general.
She was allowed to do a lot of things.
Probably wasn't allowed to talk to a lot of people. And if I was a smart journalist, I'd say, does that mean you can't talk to the Succession writers? And then you have a little story. So I don't know. I mean, my sense was that and reporters have suggested this to me, some journalists, that the younger generation were aware of the show. It's not them, but as a relationship to them, I feel like it's appropriate to be critical of their role in the world. Humanely, I feel I never wanted the thing to be like a gossipy hit piece
Sure.
about those individuals. I genuinely didn't, because I feel like life's tough, even in its own way. Being a little prince or princeling, princess, whether that's a royal family or a media family, it's real. Their difficulties and pain. They have responsibilities, and I don't know if they always live up to them. But so I never want it to be a hit piece. So I wouldn't take any pride in if it did play on their minds in a way I wish it wouldn't, because that wasn't the idea of the show. No. But yeah, it's fun.
In a way, it became predictive just because of the grasp of humanity that you had, rather than the gossipy details.
Maybe I sure did. If the only thing that's ever made me think, I wonder if we should have done more of the show, was hearing some of the details of that court case in Nevada, because that was you often got that kind of. I often get the sort of what is reality outstripping the satire, but some of the machinations that went on apparently between the family were pretty extraordinary.
Well, we all look forward to being shadow banned talking about your new film. So.
Thank you very much.